You think you're buying freedom, a car, a home, a library of music and movies. But in the modern system, you're mostly renting permission from platforms, banks, and governments that can change the rules whenever they want. The reality is, the global economy has been quietly rewired from ownership to access. That's not an accident. It's a feature of how money, policy, and corporate incentives now work together. In this breakdown, I'll show you why you'll own less, pay more, and the one shift at the end that quietly locks your generation into permanent usership. Let's start with why ownership even mattered in the first place. When you truly owned something, you had three things: control, stability, and leverage. Control meant you decided how the asset was used. Stability meant nobody could randomly revoke it. Leverage meant that asset could be borrowed against, rented out, or used to produce income. A paid-off home? That's shelter plus leverage. Tools or machines? That's income potential. Land? That's future options. Ownership used to be the buffer between you and chaos. Now, the system quietly pushes you away from that and into access instead. The core engine behind this is the way modern money is built on debt. Most money in circulation is created when someone takes on a loan. That means the system needs constant borrowing and spending to keep going. If everyone tried to save aggressively and stop taking on debt, growth would slow, asset prices would stall or fall, tax revenues would drop, and the whole thing would start seizing up. So the system punishes sitting still and rewards velocity. You're nudged to keep money moving, not to accumulate real, unencumbered ownership. For a long time, low interest rates made this feel painless. When borrowing is cheap, people and businesses can take on more debt. That extra money chases a limited pool of assets: houses, land, stocks, even rare items. Prices rise faster than wages. If you already owned, you watched your net worth inflate. If you didn't, the latter pulled away from you a little more each year. Then rates start rising to fight inflation, and here's the squeeze. High prices stay sticky, but new borrowing gets more expensive. The people who didn't buy earlier now face both inflated prices and higher monthly payments. Ownership became a moving train, and a lot of people are now standing on the platform watching it fade. This is where institutional players come in. Big pools of money, funds, corporations, large buyers, can access cheaper financing, better terms, and bulk deals you never see. They can buy thousands of homes, entire apartment complexes, or entire neighborhoods because the system is set up to trust large, predictable entities more than individual buyers. Why does policy tolerate or even encourage this? Because from the top level, large institutional owners create stable, predictable tax bases, rental streams, and financial products. Governments like stable property tax revenue and calm housing markets more than they like you getting a bargain on a starter home. Central banks and governments also have another priority: keeping asset prices from crashing too hard. Crashing prices wipe out retirement funds, bank balance sheets, and political careers. So the system leans towards supporting asset inflation and preventing sharp drops. That's great if you already own. It's a wall if you're trying to get in. There's a hidden trade happening here. You get convenience, lower upfront costs, and the feeling that you can still participate through rent, leases, and tiny down payments. In return, they get long-term cash flows, collateral, and control. Think of the economy like a treadmill with a sensor. If people slow their spending, the belt speeds up. Through lower rates, new credit products, incentives to borrow. If people start hoarding cash and trying to deleverage, that threatens the system's momentum, so policy kicks in to push you back into motion. Standing still, saving a lot, avoiding debt, trying to buy things outright, actually puts you at odds with how the machine is built. Once real ownership became harder at the macro level, companies saw an opportunity. Why fight for one-time sales in a world where your customers are already primed for constant payments? They realized there was a better way to monetize you. Don't sell you the thing. Sell you the ongoing right to use the thing, and that's where the subscription trap takes over. Once the macro system made real ownership harder, corporations did what corporations always do. They optimized for their own survival. And in that world, there's one metric that beats everything else: predictable recurring revenue. Markets don't like surprises. They don't like good year, bad year. based on whether people decide to upgrade a phone or buy a car. They like smooth, steady, growing cash flows. Subscriptions turn a messy, one-time sales business into something that looks like a utility bill. So companies started shifting from selling you products to selling you access. Housing became long-term rent instead of saving for a down payment. Cars turned into leases where you always have a monthly bill and never hit the moment of, this is finally paid off. Software moved from buy once, own the disk, to pay every month or your tools stop working. Media turned into streaming platforms that can delete shows or albums overnight, even though you've been paying for years. On the surface, it feels friendly. Lower upfront cost, easy sign-up. Cancel anytime. But the mechanism underneath is simple. Reduce the pain at the start, hide the total lifetime cost, and normalize small monthly payments as harmless background noise. Behavioral psychology does the heavy lifting here. Humans feel the pain of a big one-time payment much more than a series of tiny charges, even if the total is larger. A $600 purchase feels like a decision. $10 a month feels like nothing. So instead of making you confront the full cost, the system slices it into painless little pieces. Autopay finishes the job. Once you put a card on file, most people stop tracking it. You're not actively choosing each month, you're passively allowing it. Companies know this. They design flows where signing up is one tap, but canceling takes navigating menus, emails, maybe even customer support. The thing most people miss is that subscriptions turn you from a buyer into a bond. You're basically a stream of future payments that can be modeled, predicted, and even packaged financially. From the company's point of view, you're not a person who owns something. You're a cash flow with a churn probability. Lock-in is where this gets deeper. Your data, playlists, files, and networks are all trapped inside platforms you don't control. Your photos live in one cloud, your notes in another, your friends and groups on a handful of social platforms. Move, and you lose history, connections, convenience. So even if a competitor is cheaper or better or more ethical, switching feels like ripping out part of your digital life. Pricing is engineered around that. You get starter tiers that feel basically free. Over time, the limits start to pinch. Not enough storage, missing features, ads you want to remove. Upsells appear right when the pain gets annoying, and because everyone's here, the network effect becomes social pressure to stay and pay. Now, take that logic and apply it to your phone. Look at the apps on your home screen. Streaming, storage, productivity, editing, dating, gaming, learning. Almost none of it is something you truly own. If those companies close your account, change the terms, or geo-restrict a feature, your recourse is basically zero. You didn't buy the thing, you bought revocable permission. Politically and legally, the system mostly backs this model. Terms of service are long, vague, and heavily tilted toward the platform. Regulation moves slowly and often focuses on surface issues like making cancellation slightly easier, while leaving the core business model untouched. Laws are often shaped with input from the very companies that profit from subscriptions, so abuse gets framed as industry standard. Data collection, dark pattern design, endless upsells, these aren't bugs. They're features of a world where your attention and payments over time are the real product. From a corporate strategy point of view, it's perfect. You don't revolt over any single $9 charge. You just slowly bleed. And again, there's a trade. You get convenience, instant access, updates in the background, no need to think. In return, you accept that almost nothing in your digital or service life is truly yours. At best, you have a conditional license that can be altered or revoked. Once you see that, the next question is, who benefits politically from a population that mostly rents everything and owns almost nothing? Because this isn't just about business models, there's a deeper power incentive to keep you as a permanent renter. Now let's talk about why this renter world is so attractive to people who hold political power. Owners are harder to control. If you own your home outright, have low debt, and hold productive assets, you have options. You can move slower. You can say no to bad jobs, bad policies, and bad deals because your basic survival isn't on a 30-day billing cycle. Renters and subscribers are different. If your housing, your car, your tools, your software, and even your social life all depend on constant payments, you're on a very short leash. Miss a few and parts of your life shut off. Policy quietly builds around that. Housing rules, zoning restrictions, and development patterns that favor large projects over small local builders all tilt the landscape toward big landlords and away from distributed ownership. Student debt loads young people with obligations before they've built any assets, anchoring them to steady income just to service old promises. Weak antitrust enforcement lets a few giant platforms become the default gatekeepers for communication, work, and culture. Tax systems often favor returns on capital and large-scale investment structures more than they favor wages and small-scale saving. The message is clear. Be a consumer inside big systems, not an independent owner outside them. Over time, there's a quiet power shift, from millions of small owners to a handful of custodians. Instead of individuals owning homes, you get funds and corporations owning big chunks of the housing stock. Instead of people owning media, you get catalogs locked in streaming vaults. Instead of small businesses owning their customer relationships, you get marketplaces that own the traffic and rent it back. Politically, this has a stabilizing effect, at least from the top's point of view. A population that's indebted, subscription-locked, and living month to month is less likely to take risks. You're less likely to quit, protest, or relocate if you're juggling rent, student payments, and 10 auto-pays that keep your life functioning. You're busy fighting short-term fires. The psychological impact is heavy. When every major asset feels out of reach, housing, land, even certain careers, it's easy to slide into, "I'll never own anything anyway." That mindset pushes you towards short-term comfort over long-term leverage. Why save aggressively if the ladder feels permanently pulled up? Why invest in skills or assets if you think the game is rigged beyond repair? The narrative management helps seal it. You get slogans like sharing economy, access over ownership, flexibility, and no commitments. Renting is marketed as freedom from responsibility. Subscriptions are sold as agility and choice. You're told you don't want the burden of owning. You want the lightness of swiping a card and moving on. The thing most people miss is that someone always owns. The question is just, is it you or is it a platform, a fund, or a state-backed institution? So what do you do with this? You're not going to rewrite tax codes or overhaul housing policy on your own, but you can stop being the ideal subscriber profile the system wants. High spending, low savings, fully locked in. You shift your strategy toward owning productive assets instead of renting endless consumption. That could mean skills that generate income, tools you fully control, small slices of businesses or markets, or eventually real estate when it's possible. You get intentional about which subscriptions truly create leverage and which just numb you. If you remember nothing else, remember this. In a world built on usership, your future leverage comes from the few things you refuse to just rent. You're living in a system that drifts toward permanent renting and subscriptions because that's what keeps governments calm and corporations fed, not because it helps you build freedom. So you have to play a different game. Optimize your capital flow toward assets, skills, and ownership, not just frictionless convenience that disappears when the payments stop. As Eric Fromm warned, if I am what I have and if what I have is lost, who then am I? If you want the tactical version of this, how banks, fees, and products quietly drain you, watch the 7 invisible systems that control your bank account next, and subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this.
See you in the next one.